12 Angry Men has had a remarkable career. It spanned a lot of decades and different media. It starts out as the brainchild of Reginald Rose, one of the most talented of that first generation of TV creative talents, as a television play in 1954. It then becomes a motion picture in 1957. It was developed for the stage as well and had a number of revivals over the years. It was quite successful in the 60s and has been revived periodically since then. There have even been a couple of new versions of the movie made. William Friedkin made a version of it, and there was even a Russian version of the film made by Nikita Mikhalkov in 2009 called 12. So this is a literary property that has had quite a life.
Okay, gentlemen, everybody's here. Now, if there's anything you want, I'll be right outside the door. Just knock. Okay.
One of the things I find most interesting about it is the particular dramatic conceit of formulating an event that is so contained. It all takes place in one room in which you crowd a series of characters in there, 12 by definition, and you give them a task to perform, and they struggle with that task. And then you resolve a drama in real time. For any number of directors who have engaged that text, they've taken up that challenge in different ways, appropriate to their medium. But in every case, there is a central ingredient. Can we do a drama that makes its confines really its distinctive characteristic? You could say, and maybe this is a legacy of 50s television as well, because it was produced live in a confined studio, that it kind of revives a notion of Kammerspiel or chamber play, in which the smallness of the event, the smallness of the cast, and the intimacy of the coverage of material in it is really the strength of the play itself. It's well known that Reginald Rose took an interest in using the jury experience as dramatic material as a result of his own experience sitting on a jury a few years before he made the film. He came out of that experience reflecting on the fact that there were a good number of dramas that were literally courtroom dramas in which you used the trial process as the instrument to sustain drama and suspense.
The jury will now retire.
What dramatists hadn't taken up was what happens once that jury goes away and goes into this private space where nobody else is even allowed to look over their shoulder or second guess what they do. And that's an important part of the legal process as well. And there's an opportunity for, he thought, a high drama.
Westinghouse, Studio One.
The television production aired in September of 1954 on CBS.
Murder in the first degree, premeditated homicide, is the most serious charge tried in our criminal court.
One of a series of live, hourly, weekly dramas with a new script and a new production every week. Both NBC and CBS specialized in a number of successful such series. They were, by definition, shot in a confined studio space, almost always in New York City. The event had to be shot in sequence as it was performed in real time. A dramatic space was available on one side of an imaginary proscenium, and then a crew of varying sizes was on the other side. And typically 3 cameras would be deployed. And as the activity is unfolding, a director is making real-time switchovers from one camera to another to affect the editing. So in addition to the sort of conventional rehearsal that you would understand actors have to do, which is learning their lines and learning their dialogue, almost as much time is spent in blocking the action. That is, spending a lot of time in this three-dimensional situation, figuring out where you have to be as a performer relative to that camera and to the other 11 performers. The director was Franklin Schaffner, and he was noted for having an active camera. He liked it to move around and to move into the dramatic space and out of the dramatic space.
Let's go in order. No, wait a minute.
Actors will periodically have to get up and move from one location to another location, and a camera movement might be done in relation to their movement, so the timing has to be coordinated.
And sees the kid stick the knife into his father.
The actor has to deliver his lines at a rate If it's too fast or too slow, somebody else is going to miss a cue.
I never knew they locked the door.
Sure they locked the door. What do you think?
I don't know, it just never occurred to me, that's all.
If the camera is moving through space and trying to find a particular actor who's delivering the line at that point, the other 11 actors have to make sure they're not blocking the camera view.
6 days. I should have finished it in 2. Talk, talk, talk. You ever hear so much talk about nothing?
So they all have marks that they have to hit very precisely in this kind of situation.
All right, I've got a proposition to make.
There's a moment at the end of Act 1 when juror number 8, the outlier, played by Robert Cummings, has requested a jury vote. He sort of walks away from the others, and Schaffner's camera moves along the table as the vote is taking place, very smoothly down the line, and then finds Robert Cummings and settles on him at the end of that take. Then we go to commercial. It says in the script, during the commercial time, no time will elapse in the drama.
We return now to Westinghouse Studio 1 and 12 Angry Men.
When they come back a couple of minutes later, the shot has to pick up exactly as though we've never left. So Robert Cummings is exactly in that same spot. All the other actors have assumed their position. And then the camera moves back, more or less reversing its field as the outcome of the jury vote is taken. In the television play, the ending is very interesting in part because there's an element of ambiguity about it, a little bit of uncertainty. We always think of 12 Angry Men as finally ending with a unanimous verdict that has swung 180 degrees from the original conception. Much of the drama has been based on the fact that there is one juror in particular, juror number 3, who is adamant that the defendant has to be prosecuted. Once juror number 3 finally concedes, the jurors begin to file out. Schaffner's camera lingers over that situation for a moment, and the last 2 to make their way to the door and to begin to exit are juror number 3, the recalcitrant, and juror number 8.
They're waiting.
And the knife that had been so crucial becomes a prop in an interaction between the 2 of them. We're not sure whether he has in fact reconciled himself to the not guilty verdict. In the script, it then called upon Schaffner's camera to move away from the door as those 2 figures finally exited and go over to the table and to settle on a close-up of a piece of paper there that had not guilty. But what Schaffner does in the final analysis is that he leaves the issue a little bit unresolved. He does it in part, I think, because of the symmetry of it. The program began with this long extended shot looking down on the room, and then it moved to the door as the jurors came in. And then he just kind of reverses that move at the end of the film. But it leaves it a little bit open-ended. Henry Fonda is given credit, and deserves the credit, for conceiving of taking the television property and making it a motion picture. He took an interest in it, and he made it happen because of who he was. He signed on to produce, collaborating with Reginald Rose, and they created their own production company, Orion Nova, and ended up having the opportunity to take it to United Artists for distribution. The thing that set this in motion was the success of Marty, the 1953 NBC production by Fred Coe, which was then made into a movie. It was a successful property for United Artists. They could publicize it as a kind of art film and did very well with it. And they wanted to follow through with some other television properties to adopt, and they thought they could market it in roughly the same way. And over the course of a few years, Rod Serling scripts like Patterns and Reginald Rose's 12 Angry Men end up as sort of art-independent film.
I want to ask you something. Do you believe his story?
I don't know whether I believe it or not. Maybe I don't.
So how come you vote not guilty?
Well, there were 11 votes for guilty. It's not easy to raise my hand and send a boy off to die without talking about it first.
When Henry Fonda incarnates juror number 8, the one major star in either the television or the film version. That part, of course, changes qualitatively because it's Henry Fonda. And he brings all of his career achievements up to that point and a good deal of familiarity with the audience. He was Tom Joad in The Grapes of Wrath, he was Abraham Lincoln in Young Mr. Lincoln, and he was even Wyatt Earp in My Darling Clementine, all John Ford films. He had cultivated an image over the years of being a kind of American type, a kind of solid citizen, often rustic, unassuming, but firm in his convictions. Reginald Rose had the opportunity to work on the script for the movie version of 12 Angry Men. It wasn't given to a separate scriptwriter, and of course he was co-producer on the film as well.
Rice Pops. It's a product I work on at the agency. The breakfast with a built-in bounce. I wrote that line. Very catchy.
One of the things that he does in the movie version is that the characters are fleshed out a little bit more. You learn more about their backgrounds. Each one has a little bit of backstory and, in many cases, a profession that helps to explain a little bit of who they are and why they do what they do when they're in the jury room. There is a racial issue that underpins the original conception of 12 Angry Men. You have 12 white jurors with different backgrounds and a racial minority as a defendant. In the television play, that's never specified. Periodically, the jurors will speak of the defendant in such a way as to identify his class background. In the movie, it is finally clarified. There's specifically a cutaway to the defense table, and you see a young Hispanic man there, and you understand the ethnicity of the defendant. When you look at the casting of it, other than Henry Fonda, there's probably only one figure who had substantial name recognition as a result of movie activity, and that would be Lee J. Cobb, who played juror number 3. And Cobb brings a quality to that part. He's more or less reacting some of the Johnny-friendly characteristics from On the Waterfront, which had helped to make his reputation, that bluster and that aggressiveness. When you look at 12 Angry Men today, there are a lot of people you recognize, often because their careers were enhanced in later years and their recognition level increased. But in many cases, they were actors who were still fairly early in their careers, like Jack Klugman, and they would go on to more prominence later on. E.J. Marshall didn't have that much recognition at the time that the film was made. Only 2 of the performers, interestingly, carried over from the television version, George Voskovic, who played the East European immigrant, and Joseph Sweeney, who did such an engaging turn in the television play that he was retained for the movie as well. The budget was being set for the film, and it was ridiculously low. They wanted to budget it in such a way that it would be under $400,000. The only way they could do that was by virtue of the fact that the star took a deferred payment. They felt that they could bring it in under $400,000 only if they didn't have a big-name director to take it over. So they called upon somebody that Rose had worked with before and who had very good credentials in working in live productions, and that was Sidney Lumet. This is Sidney Lumet's first movie, but it's not his first creative activity by any means. He came to it with a lot of useful experience, and he knew how to work in a situation in which you have a kind of finite dramatic space. It's pretty common to say that when you take a play and adopt it to the movies, one of the ambitions of a screenwriter or a director might be to find ways to open it up, to take a limited space and actually move some of the drama out into other locations. By and large, the movie production of 12 Angry Men resists that urge. At the beginning of the film, of course, the camera takes you from the street into the courthouse, and then it kind of moves along through the courthouse environment and finds the courtroom where the drama is taking place. Then you spend a little bit of time in the courtroom before you adjourn to the jury room with the jurors. And then at the end of the film, as a way of kind of relieving the tension that has taken place in the previous 90 minutes, the jurors move outside, and there's this shot that kind of opens up to the external world once again. But that's the extent of that concession to opening the drama up at the beginning and at the end of the film. It's to mark the difference between just the quality of experience that is commonly available in the external environment and the quality of experience that you're required to participate in when you're in the jury room with the 12 Angry Men. The production was shot in a New York studio in the Fox Movietone studios, largely because they could afford the rent there in a rather downscale facility. The movie is shot out of sequence, as all movies are, but it's reconstructed in such a way as to preserve that sense of perfect continuity and no temporal gaps from one moment to the next. So a lot of attention had to be paid to continuity issues as the drama unfolds. I think throughout his career, Sidney Lumet has always been proud of the fact that he brings films in on time and on budget, and in some cases under budget. And he often credited the fact that he worked in television where you had to work quickly and cheaply and get things done. Lumet brought the production in $60,000 under that small budget, in part because he spent a lot of time rehearsing. He shoots 20 days. He rehearsed for 2 weeks prior to that. His rehearsals involved a couple of stages. The first few days of rehearsing, they sort of read through their lines. He gathers all the actors together in a kind of roundtable discussion. He likes to spend a lot of time asking them to just talk out their characters and become familiar with them, or in some cases to embellish their characters. The actors themselves can add dimensions to these figures, not just replicate whatever they find on the script. And if you do that as a kind of collective exercise, then you're working with an ensemble cast. They become familiar with each other, and that helps to produce that kind of synergy they hope to have in the eventual production.
I'm just saying a coincidence is possible.
And I say it's not possible.
Where did that come from? It's the same night.
He thinks he can get from actors what he wants with just a take or two. He edits in his head, he's often said, so he doesn't have to shoot a lot of extra footage and then spend time editing the production to get it down. When Sidney Lumet was working in television, he figured out a rather speedy way to organize the distribution of shots within a given set to minimize the number of times that you have to move the camera or change the lights. He will just create a certain environment with one background in place. He'll shoot all the setups there with a minimal movement of the camera from shot to shot. Then he'll find another background and just sort of go around the room. As he says with respect to 12 Angry Men, it was wall 1, wall 2, wall 3, wall 4. Then later in the drama, the light quality in that environment changes. A storm comes in and the whole environment darkens. So he said we just repeated the process, wall 1, wall 2, wall 3, wall 4, with a different lighting scheme. Lumet signed on a pro for cinematographer, Boris Kaufman. Kaufman prided himself on working in a kind of realist black and white style, kind of crisp, clean black and white footage, but with an attention to detail. That opening shot in which the camera moves so gracefully through the space of this small room kind of alerts you to the fact that the camera is going to be one of the players. It's going to be the 13th body in that environment. And it's going to move around and pick up details about the characters as the drama unfolds. Lumet worked closely with Kaufman to make a number of decisions about staging, but also about camera activity and even rather technical things about what kind of lens to use from moment to moment, which had the net effect of leading the drama in a particular direction.
Is everyone here?
The old man is inside.
Oh, would you knock on the door for him?
Yeah.
Earlier on in the film, things are often staged in such a way that there is a fair amount of sort of available space for the actors to move about in. Oftentimes, the camera angle will be above the eye line, and you get a chance to look down on them so that the figures don't overlap. There's space between them, and there's spaces around the edges, and they get up and they move about with some sense of freedom.
I'd like to go over something, if you gentlemen don't mind.
And as the afternoon wears on and as the level of anger increases, the space around the actors actually seems to start to change physically. He will lower the level of the camera relative to the actors so that compositions begin to take place in which the bodies of the actors seem to kind of overlap or kind of press against each other. Through these technical decisions he's making, it's as though he's actually constricting the space more and more as the drama wears on. And it increases a kind of claustrophobia that he calculated as one of the dimensions of the drama 12 Angry Men. But there are also moments in the film where they can create a dramatic effect by a variant on that.
I don't understand you people. I mean, all these picky little points you keep bringing up, they don't mean nothing.
There's an important dramatic moment in the film where juror number 10 makes a speech in which he can no longer hide his racism.
Look, you know how these people lie? It's born in them. I mean, what the heck? I don't have to tell you. They don't know what the truth is.
And a sea change takes place in the attitude of the jury as they reject him and move away from him.
Well, I'm trying to tell you, you're making a big mistake, you people. This kid is a liar. I know it. I know all about them.
The use of a wide-angle lens would have the net effect of lengthening the depth of the room and kind of bulging out the edges a little bit.
I mean, what's happening in here?
So the drama of the moment, in which they have to literally separate themselves from his views, is given form physically by virtue of the fact that it's staged this way and it has that particular lens. Another pattern that Lumet and Kaufman calculated is sort of the scale of shots as the drama unfolds.
Now, all those voting guilty, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4.
There are more and more long shots at the beginning of the film, but in the last third of the drama, the pacing of the edits increases, the framing of the shots become tighter. Jurors are more commonly isolated in 1 or 2 or 3 tightly framed shots. And there is an interesting statistic to the effect that roughly half of the edits in the film take place in about the last 20 minutes or so of the scene in the jury room.
What do you know about it?
I only know the woman's eyesight is in question now. She had to be able to identify a person 60 feet away at night without glasses.
You can't send someone off to die on evidence like that.
Oh, don't give me that.
At the end of the film, juror number 3, after being put upon by the others to concede, finally once again says, all right, as though giving up. But in Reginald Rose's script for the movie version, there is a moment at the very end of the script where juror number 3 is actually the last person to leave the jury room. And what he does is he picks the knife up, which has been such an important prop earlier in the film, and his anger resumes, and then he throws the knife angrily down on the table and he leaves, as though he hasn't been reconciled, and who knows what he's going to do, whether there might actually be a hung jury. For whatever reason, this wasn't considered a satisfactory ending, and clearly 12 Angry Men, the film, ends in a very different way. Possibly because of the presence of Henry Fonda in the cast, and of course they did exploit him in advertising the film. United Artists had ambitions for this production. They thought they would have another success like Marty. They hoped to do wide distribution very quickly with an appropriate level of publicity. The film opened in a large theater in New York, and the audiences didn't turn out for it, despite the fact that it won some awards and got some fairly decent critical commentary. The plan that United Artists had for an ambitious distribution just didn't happen as a result of that initial failure. It was received pretty well overseas. It won a couple of festival prizes and apparently had some audience interest overseas. But as far as we can tell, it more or less made back its rather modest budget and never really turned a profit. Throughout the course of his career, Sidney Lumet prided himself in being able to work in a variety of different genres, some big-scale movies, some small-scale movies. But there are things about 12 Angry Men that do predict directions that he would take. One of the abiding issues is a sense of social justice. I think immediately of a film like Pawnbroker, a film like Dog Day Afternoon, which is in some sense a crime drama, but also an issue about gay oppression. One of the traits that carries over is a regard for an individual who might defy expectation in a Henry Fonda way and might defy kind of perceived majority opinion. That just seems right to him.